The cleaning lady laughed loudly, ignoring the starving child. "No one will believe you." But Lily's voice echoed faintly. The father, Arthur, burst in. What he saw made the woman's laughter freeze on her face forever. Dusk tinted the horizon with hues of orange and purple, but Arthur barely noticed the beauty of the late afternoon as his car glided down the long, tree-lined driveway that led to his vast estate. The landscape, which had once seemed like a welcoming embrace, now stretched like a silent void, a constant reminder of the absence that had crept into his life 2 years earlier with the departure of his beloved wife, Ilara. His mind, exhausted from yet another business trip that had kept him away for weeks, was overwhelmed with the numbers and meetings that filled his days, a vain attempt to fill the hole left by the loss that had struck him so deeply. He felt like a stranger in his own home, a spectator to a life that insisted on going on without him, and this sense of displacement consumed him, transforming him into a man who sought refuge in the relentless grind of work, believing that in doing so he could protect what little remained of his fragmented heart. As he pulled up in front of the imposing mansion, a sepulchral stillness hung in the air, so different from the effervescence Ilara usually brought with her infectious laughter and vibrant energy. The lights in the house were on, but there was none of the familiar warmth he expected, only a cold illumination that emphasized the empty grandeur of the rooms. Arthur got out of the vehicle, feeling the weight of fatigue on his broad shoulders, and walked through the front door, where a disturbing silence awaited him. Usually, his children, Lily, 6, and little Leo, still a baby, would rush to meet him, their hugs and voices filling the space. But today, their absence was a deafening echo, an unsettling omen that sent a chill down his spine, a sense that something was not right, something that the wealth and success of his ventures could never fix or explain. He walked through the silent hallways, his heart pounding with growing anxiety, and then sounds began to emerge from the back of the house, coming from the kitchen. First, a muffled cry, almost a moan, which he recognized with a shiver as his little Lily. Then, shockingly, a high, shrill laugh, unmistakable, belonging to Mrs. Albright, the cleaning lady who had become a central figure in his children's lives after Ilara's departure. The laugh was cold, devoid of any warmth, and carried a hint of derision that made Arthur's blood run cold. He quickened his pace, every fiber of his being clamoring for answers, a dark foreboding squeezing his chest with an almost unbearable force, an instinctive warning he had long ago learned to ignore, but which now proved impossible to silence. As he approached the kitchen door, the sounds became clearer, more agonizing. He heard Lily's voice, choked with tears, pleading with a heartbreaking fragility, a desperate plea that resonated in Arthur's soul like a cry for help. "Daddy, help me. She won't let me eat." Mrs. Albright's laughter rang out again, louder and crueler, mixed with inaudible words, but charged with a malice that made Arthur pause for a moment, his body tense, his fists clenched. An uncontrollable fury began to bubble within him, an overwhelming wave that drove him to open the door with a momentum he hadn't known he possessed. The scene unfolding before his eyes was a living nightmare, an image that would be etched in his memory with painful clarity and never leave him. In the center of the spotless kitchen, Lily was huddled on the floor, her eyes brimming with tears, her face pale and lined with hunger and fear. Beside her on the counter sat an untouched plate of food, while Mrs. Albright, wearing an apron and a sadistic smile on her lips, held a wooden spoon as if about to hit the child. The air was thick with tension and desperation, and little Leo, in the stroller next to her, whimpered softly, as if sensing his sister's anguish. Arthur, a ruthless businessman in the corporate world, felt his world crumble, the facade of control and success disintegrating at the sight. His eyes, once tired, now burned with a ferocious intensity, and the voice he used to command corporate empires echoed in the kitchen with a force that made the windows shake, a primal scream coming from the depths of his wounded soul. "What is happening here?" Mrs. Albright's laughter froze on her face, replaced by sudden terror and a clumsy attempt to regain her composure. But it was too late. Arthur was a man of means, a tycoon whose companies shaped urban landscapes and moved global markets, but behind the facade of wealth and power, he was a broken man. The loss of Ilara, his light, his compass, had left him in a state of emotional numbness, an empty existence where the only thing that seemed to make sense was the relentless pursuit of more work. No matter how many distractions prevented him from confronting the searing pain of absence. Ilara had been the essence of his life, the melody that lulled his days, and her departure during the birth of little Leo had ripped away not only a part of his heart, but also his very ability to feel, to connect with the world, and, tragically, with his own children. He found himself thrown into a sea of fatherly responsibilities he was unprepared for. A man lost in his own home, with a little girl crying out for a mother who would never return, and a baby who would never know her. Into this vacuum of grief and disorientation, Mrs. Albright emerged, a middle-aged woman with impeccable appearance and a seemingly flawless resume. She presented herself with an aura of unwavering dedication, promising care and stability for the children, and Arthur, blinded by grief and the guilt of his own emotional ineptitude, welcomed her as a blessing. She was efficient, organized, and at first seemed to bring some order to the chaos that had become life in the mansion. However, behind the facade of subservience and competence lay a complex soul, marked by long-held resentments and insatiable greed. Mrs. Albright, with her forced smile and her eyes that sometimes shone with an icy light, nurtured a meticulous plan, a web of manipulation woven with patience and cruelty, with the aim of usurping not only Ilara's place, but also control of Arthur's vast fortune, driven by a deep bitterness and a distorted belief that the world owed her something, and that family, in its fragility, was the perfect instrument for her silent revenge. Arthur's scream echoed through the kitchen, a thunderclap that shattered Mrs. Albright's mask of serenity into 1,000 pieces, revealing for an instant the cruelty hidden behind her previously concealed eyes. She took a step back, the wooden spoon falling to the floor with a dull thud, and a cold dread filled her expression, replacing the sneer with a look of guilt and fear. Lily, still cowering, raised her tear-filled eyes to her father, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding her small face, as if his presence were an unexpected miracle, a ray of sunshine in a seemingly endless storm. Arthur rushed to his daughter, kneeling and wrapping her in a tight embrace. He felt the girl's small body tremble against his, an unmistakable sign of the terror she had endured, and a sharp pain, more intense than any grief, pierced his chest. He held Lily tightly, as if he could shield her from all the evil in the world with the sheer strength of his arms, a gesture of love and desperation that had long lain dormant within him. Mrs. Albright, recovering from the initial shock, tried to compose herself, her hands trembling slightly as she forced a subservient smile. She began to mumble lame excuses, saying Lily was just throwing a tantrum because she wouldn't eat her vegetables. But she was only trying to be firm for the child's sake, a rehearsed display of concern that, to Arthur, sounded like the vilest of lies. His eyes, previously blinded by pain and naive trust, now saw the woman in a new light, a cold, unforgiving light that exposed every nuance of her deceit. He stood, his daughter still clinging to his leg, and stared at the cleaning woman with an intensity that made her recoil again. There was no longer room for indifference or guilt in his gaze, only restrained anger and an iron determination to uncover the truth, to protect his children at any cost, a silent oath that echoed in his wounded heart. In the days that followed, the mansion, once a haven of silence and solitude for Arthur, became a stage of observation and growing apprehension. He tried to reach Lily and Leo, but he noticed their distance, the way the girl shrank when Mrs. Albright approached, the baby's cries that seemed to intensify in her presence, details that had previously gone unnoticed in his haze of grief and work. Lily, once a vibrant child, now seemed withdrawn, her large, sad eyes carrying a weight unbecoming of a 6-year-old. Arthur noted the doors locked at unusual hours, the plates of food that always looked the same, Mrs. Albright's insistence on supervising every interaction between him and the children, a subtle web of control that tightened with each passing day. The woman alternated between exaggerated subservience in Arthur's presence, with a solicitous smile and sweet words, and moments when he saw her throw icy glances at Lily when she thought no one was looking, a duality that sent chills down his spine. Guilt gnawed at Arthur, a slow poison that made him question every decision, every moment of absence, every trust placed in him. He remembered Ilara, her easy laugh, her innate ability to see the good in people, and felt a tightness in his chest at the thought of having failed to protect her legacy, the lives she had entrusted to him. The house, once a home filled with happy memories, now seemed imbued with an oppressive sadness, a dark secret lingering in the air. Little by little, Arthur began to notice disturbing patterns, unexplained scratches on Lily's arms, which Mrs. Albright attributed to clumsy play, the way she avoided eye contact with the cleaning lady, and the long hours she spent locked in her room with her children, which she claimed were educational activities but now felt more like a form of isolation. He felt like an invisible barrier existed between him and his own children, a barrier meticulously constructed by the woman he had hired to care for them. Ilara's memory, once a source of pain, began to transform into a driving force. He remembered a small wooden box she kept, filled with letters and notes, an intimate diary of her thoughts and hopes. That night, while Mrs. Albright slept and the house fell into a heavy silence, Arthur reached for the box, feeling a pang of hope and desperation. He needed answers, a clue, anything that might help him unravel the mystery surrounding his children. As he opened the box, a soft scent of jasmine, Ilara's favorite, filled the air, and his eyes fell upon a letter, addressed to him in his wife's elegant handwriting. The words, written with love and a haunting premonition, seemed like an echo from the past, a voice calling him back to life, to his responsibility, to the fight he was about to face. He felt that he was not alone in this battle, that Ilara's love still guided him, a faint light in the darkness that surrounded him. Ilara's elegant handwriting, a hallmark of her vibrant personality, seemed to dance in the words of the letter Arthur held with trembling hands. A soft scent of jasmine, the fragrance that always reminded him of her, wafted from the paper, filling the air and bringing a wave of sweet and painful memories. The dim light of dawn fell across the lines, revealing a message that seemed to have been written for that very moment, an echo of his wife's love and concern. She spoke of the importance of protecting their children's innocence, of the need to be present, to observe with one's heart, for appearances did not always reveal the deepest truth. There was one passage that struck him with the force of a lightning bolt. "My love, trust your instincts. If you ever feel the shadow approaching our little ones, do not hesitate. True evil hides in the sweetest smiles and the emptiest promises. Our children are our treasure, the extension of our love, and they deserve a world of light and security." Alara's words were not an explicit premonition about Mrs. Albright, but they were a call, a poignant reminder of his responsibility and a push to wake him from his torpor. Alara's letter was a catalyst, a flame that reignited something deep and dormant within Arthur. The guilt that had consumed him for so long began to transmute into cold rage and unwavering determination. He was no longer merely reacting. He was acting, driven by a strength that came from the unconditional love he felt for his family, a love he had allowed the pain of loss to obscure. The silent promise he made to Alara and to himself was clear. He would uncover every secret, tear down every facade, and protect Lily and Lil with the same ferocity with which he protected his corporate empires. From that moment on, the mansion would no longer be a monument to his grief, but a battlefield where truth would be the only weapon and love the only flag. His eyes, once lost in the vastness of his own melancholy, now shone with a piercing clarity, focused on a single goal: justice for his children. In the days that followed, Arthur became a watchful shadow, his footsteps echoing silently through the hallways, his ears alert to every whisper, every forced laugh, every muffled cry. Mrs. Albright, with her mask of subservience, continued to alternate between false kindness in his presence and veiled cruelty when he left. He caught her once, for a moment, casting an icy glare at Lily, playing on the living room rug, a look filled with a contempt that made Arthur's stomach churn. Another time he heard her voice, once so honeyed, sound sharp and imperative, scolding Leo for a natural baby cry, with an impatience that bordered on aggression. The woman seemed to have a sixth sense for his presence, and whenever he approached, she assumed impeccable posture, a forced smile on her lips, weaving excuses and explanations for any noise or unusual behavior from the children. But Arthur was no longer the man blinded by grief. He saw the cracks in the facade, the shadows that moved behind her eyes. Lily, small, fragile Lily, was the most painful mirror of the situation. Her eyes, once filled with a childlike sparkle, now held a deep sadness, a constant apprehension. She literally flinched every time Mrs. Albright approached, a reflex conditioned by fear that broke Arthur's heart. He noticed the scratches that reappeared on her arms and legs, the bruises the cleaning lady attributed to falls and clumsy pranks, but which Arthur, with a heavy heart, began to mentally record. The girl, who had once chattered endlessly, now spoke in whispers, her sentences short and evasive, as if afraid her words might bring more pain. Arthur tried to get closer, sat beside her, told stories, but the barrier of fear and distrust Mrs. Albright had erected between them was nearly impenetrable, and every attempt at connection was a painful reminder of her own absence and the wounds she had allowed to open. Determined not to let anything slip through the cracks, Arthur began acting with the precision of a strategist. He installed small security cameras, discreetly hidden in toys and decorative objects, covering the main rooms where the children spent most of their time, except their bedrooms, respecting their privacy but focusing on the common areas and the kitchen. He also began meticulously reviewing the household's financial records, bank statements, and purchase receipts, looking for any irregularities, any unusual expenditures that might indicate something beyond what met the eye. Arthur's nights became a maze of insomnia and surveillance, spending hours watching the recordings, his eyes fixed on the screen, searching for a sign, irrefutable proof of the cruelty he felt hovering over his children. The silence of the mansion, once a refuge, was now an ally in his search for the truth, a stage for the revelation of his darkest secrets. Mrs. Albright, sensing the change in Arthur's demeanor, though unaware of the full extent of her investigation, intensified her manipulation. She tried to undermine Lily and Leo's trust in their father by insinuating that he was always busy, that he had no time for them, that she was the only constant in their lives. She tightly controlled the children's access to toys and activities, often depriving them of small joys under the guise of discipline, but in reality it was a way of reinforcing her own power. Calls from friends or relatives trying to reach the children were intercepted with flimsy excuses, and rare visits were closely monitored, with Mrs. Albright hovering like a shadow, preventing any more intimate conversation. She was building a fortress of isolation around the children, a web to ensure they had nowhere to run but to her, their supposed caregiver. Yet even amidst Mrs. Albright's web of control, Arthur found small, precious moments to reconnect with his children. He would take advantage of the cleaning lady's distraction to sit beside Lily on the bed, reading to her in a soft, loving voice, feeling the warmth of her small body against his, a reminder that their love was stronger than any fear. For Leo, he took time to play on the rug, making faces and cooing, watching the baby's innocent smile, which was like a balm to his wounded soul. In one such moment, as Lily slept, Arthur whispered in her ear a promise that echoed in the silence of the room. "Daddy is here now, my love. Daddy will protect you, always." And he knew, with a certainty that transcended all doubt, that this was the purest truth, the strength that would guide him through the darkness. Arthur's nights became a silent torment, each minute spent in front of the monitors, where the security camera footage unfolded into a mosaic of domestic routine that gradually revealed a shocking truth. At first, everything seemed normal. Mrs. Albright carrying out her tasks with her usual efficiency, the children playing or resting. However, with the patience of a hunter, Arthur began to notice the subtleties, the deviations, the shadows that moved behind the facade. He saw the cleaning lady intentionally ignore Lily's calls for water or a toy, leaving the girl to whimper alone for long minutes before responding with false cordiality. He saw her, in a moment of distraction, slip a piece of bread out of reach of little Leo, who held out his hungry hands, a cruel smile on his lips, before turning and offering a bland porridge, almost as if testing the limits of childhood endurance. Each scene was a blow to Arthur's heart, a painful confirmation that his worst fears were coming true. Mrs. Albright's cruelty did not manifest itself in acts of overt physical violence, but in an insidious web of emotional deprivation and calculated neglect, designed to undermine the children's will and make them dependent on her. Arthur saw Lily scolded for crying, for missing her mother, for any display of emotion that didn't fit the script of obedience the cleaning lady had imposed. He observed how the woman forced the girl to eat food she clearly hated, threatening to deprive her of playtime or contact with her father if she didn't, and how she kept Leo in a crib for hours on end, ignoring his cries and whimpers under the pretense that he needed to learn to soothe himself. The recordings revealed a disturbing pattern of isolation, with Albright, locking the children in their rooms for prolonged periods, preventing them from accessing their favorite toys or seeing their father, all to solidify her control and ensure that she was the sole source of comfort and discipline in their lives. Arthur's heart broke with every image, with every stifled sigh from Lily, with every lost look from Leo. The guilt that had tormented him since Ilara's departure now became an unbearable burden, a poison burning in his veins. He felt like a failure, an absent father who had allowed a monster to infiltrate his home, exploiting his children's fragility at their most vulnerable moment. But along with the pain, an icy, unbreakable determination began to take hold of his soul. He would not only protect his children, he would exact revenge, not with violence, but with the truth. Every tear from Lily, every cry from Leo, would be the basis of his accusation. Every act of cruelty from Mrs. Albright would be exposed to the light of day. From that moment on, the pursuit of justice was not just an option, but a sacred mission, an oath sworn to Ilara's memory and the innocence of her children. As the cameras revealed the cleaning lady's hidden face, Arthur also delved into the estate's financial records, a maze of numbers and transactions that he, in his grief and distraction, had delegated almost entirely to Mrs. Albright. He began to notice small discrepancies, unusual expenditures that didn't align with the needs of the household or the children. There were regular transfers to an unknown account, amounts that, combined, represented a significant portion of Ilara's fortune, earmarked for her children in a trust Arthur had established. Mrs. Albright, with her cunning and unrestricted access to the household's documents and passwords, had found a way to siphon off these funds, manipulating the records and creating false invoices to cover up her thefts. She wasn't just abusing her children, she was systematically draining the inheritance Ilara had left them, an act of betrayal that revealed the depth of her greed and malice. Mrs. Albright, for her part, sensed the change in the air. Arthur's silent watchfulness, though she couldn't pinpoint the exact source of his distrust. She intensified her tactics, becoming more subtle, more calculating. One day, while Arthur watched from afar, she forced Lily to write him a letter filled with words of love and gratitude for the cleaning lady's kindness, an attempt to manipulate her father's perception and discredit any future complaints from the girl. Another time, Arthur caught her trying to persuade Leo to call her mummy, an act that made his blood boil with pent-up rage. He had to restrain himself from exploding, from revealing his investigation prematurely, knowing he needed irrefutable evidence, a complete dossier that left no room for doubt. With each passing day, the tension in the mansion grew, a taut rope ready to snap, and Arthur felt the weight of every lie, every manipulation, every abuse the woman inflicted on his children. Even with the constant surveillance and the tension mounting, Arthur didn't relinquish his connection with Lily and Leo. He seized every moment Mrs. Albright was away, even for a few minutes, to get closer to his children. He sat on the floor with Lily, building towers of blocks, and in one of those moments, the little girl, her eyes still full of fear, but with a glimmer of trust, whispered, "She doesn't like it when we laugh too much, Daddy." The simple, childlike phrase echoed the veiled cruelty Arthur had witnessed in the recordings. To Leo, he sang lullabies, rocking the baby in his arms, feeling the warmth of her tiny, fragile body, silently promising that he would never again allow any shadow to reach them. Those small moments of connection were the fuel of his soul, the constant reminder of what he was fighting for, of the innocence he needed to reclaim, of the unconditional love he had rediscovered amidst the pain and anger. With each new piece of evidence, each fragment of recording, each financial entry, Mrs. Albright's image crumbled, revealing the true face of a meticulous predator, driven by deep bitterness and an insatiable thirst for control and wealth. Arthur felt the weight of the truth on his shoulder, the responsibility of being the voice of his children, the sword of justice. He knew the confrontation was inevitable, that the battle would be arduous, but the image of Lily cowering, Leo whimpering, and the words from Ilara's letter, "Our children are our treasure," echoed in his mind, giving him the strength to carry on. He was ready for war, not for himself, but for the little hearts he had promised to protect, who now cried out for redemption and a future of light. Arthur, who had transformed from a father torn apart by loss to a protective vigilante, felt every fiber of his being cry out for justice, an unshakable force driving him to unravel the web of lies and cruelty woven by Mrs. Albright. He had delved into the details, analyzing the recordings with the meticulousness of a seasoned detective, cross-referencing information with the household financial records and every little note Ilara had left, and the picture that emerged was that of a meticulous and cruel plan, woven with a coldness that shocked him with each new discovery. Mrs. Albright was not just a negligent caregiver. She was a calculating creditor who had exploited her family's pain and her children's innocence for her own gain, a truth that burned in his chest like an icy fire. Her evil manifested itself not in screams or overt physical aggression, but in a more insidious and devastating form of abuse, emotional deprivation, psychological manipulation, and systematic isolation aimed at breaking Lily and Leo's spirits, making them malleable and dependent on her twisted will, a burden Arthur felt in his soul. He felt the weight of his own absence, of his blindness, and this guilt fueled his resolve, a constant reminder that there was no more time to waste, that the moment of truth had arrived. He began to act with surgical precision, moving around the house with a deceptive calm that belied the storm raging within him. A corporate strategist now focusing entirely on protecting his greatest treasure. Rather than confront Mrs. Albright directly, Arthur opted for a strategy of gradual destabilization, of reclaiming the territory that had been usurped from his children. He significantly increased his presence at home, cancelling appointments and delegating important tasks to his trusted team, prioritizing every moment of his time with his children. When the cleaning lady tried to isolate Lily in her room under the guise of reflection time or necessary discipline, Arthur intervened gently, with an authority that brooked no challenge, offering to read her a story or play with her in the garden. Lily at first seemed startled by the sudden change in routine, but slowly began to relax in his presence, feeling her father's security. He insisted that all meals be eaten as a family at the kitchen or dining room table, preventing Mrs. Albright from controlling the children's separate eating habits, a small but significant act of rebellion that she could not openly contest without revealing her true intentions. Mrs. Albright, for her part, felt the ground slipping beneath her feet with each passing day. Arthur's vigilance, which had previously been a veiled and distant distrust, now manifested itself in every look he gave her, in every subtle intervention that disarmed her tactics. She tried to maintain her facade of subservience and dedication, but her eyes sometimes shone with barely concealed hatred when Arthur prevented her from exercising her control over the children, a contained fury she could barely conceal. She murmured excuses about the need for discipline, about the lack of boundaries the children were developing, trying to justify her actions, but Arthur merely listened with an impassive expression, not giving her the opportunity to prolong the manipulation, cutting her speeches with a cold and unquestionable authority. The tension in the mansion was almost palpable, a silence charged with unspoken meaning, where every move, every word, was a piece in an emotional chess game approaching checkmate. She knew, on some level, that something was wrong, that her house of cards was about to crumble, and frustration and despair were beginning to eat away at her once impeccable composure. Arthur, aware that he needed a trusted, outside source of support who could testify to the truth and help him in the next phase of his battle, remembered Clara, Ilara's sister. Clara had always been a strong woman, with a huge heart and keen intuition, and Arthur knew she would be a powerful ally. She'd tried to reach out to the children after Ilara's departure, but Mrs. Albright had always found an excuse to prevent visits, claiming the children were sick or busy, a separation that Arthur, in his blindness and grief, had allowed. Now he sought her out, sharing the evidence he had collected, the security camera footage that revealed the veiled cruelty, the bank statements that revealed the systematic embezzlement of Ilara's inheritance, every sordid detail that unmasked the cleaning lady. Clara, seeing the images and hearing her brother-in-law's stories, felt a searing pain in her chest and a righteous fury, a silent promise that she would help Arthur fight for his nephews, honor his sister's memory, and expose Mrs. Albright's deception before everyone. Clara's presence at the mansion was a distinct shock to Mrs. Albright, who had not expected the intervention of such a close relative. At first, the woman tried her usual manipulative tactics, making excuses and trying to control Clara's interactions with the children. But the aunt, with her firm sweetness and discerning gaze, was unfazed by any of the cleaning lady's wiles. She embraced Lily and Leo with genuine and unconditional affection, and the girl, feeling the security and love long denied her, began to open up, telling stories of unfair punishments and secrets that Mrs. Albright had forbidden her to reveal to her father. Each word Lily said was a new piece in the puzzle, a painful but essential confirmation of the evidence Arthur already possessed. Further solidifying the case against the cleaning lady, Mrs. Albright watched the scene with a mixture of panic and growing anger, realizing that her influence over the children was rapidly disintegrating and that her time was running out. She tried one last tactic, insinuating that Arthur and Clara were messing with the children's minds with their stories, but the calm and unwavering determination in their eyes silenced her once and for all. Arthur, with Clara's unwavering support and the robust, irrefutable evidence in hand, felt it was time to take the next decisive step, to bring the truth to light, to seek the justice his children deserved with all their hearts. He had consulted a renowned family lawyer, an expert in child abuse and fraud cases, who had reviewed all the evidence with meticulous attention and agreed that the case was solid, urgent, and unquestionable. The decision was made. Mrs. Albright would be formally confronted, not only by the law enforcement authorities already aware of the situation, but also in a court of law, where the extent of her cruelty and greed would be exposed mercilessly and without a shadow of a doubt. There would be no more room for manipulation, for lame excuses, for the oppressive shadow she had cast over his family's life and the innocence of his children. Arthur looked at Lily and Leo, playing in the garden under Clara's loving gaze, their laughter now softer, their smiles more sincere, and felt a wave of love and hope flood his chest. He would do this for them, for Ilara, and for all the innocent hearts that deserved to be protected and loved. The final battle was about to begin, and Arthur was ready to fight with all his soul and all the truth he had uncovered. The air in the mansion, once heavy only with Arthur's grief, now pulsed with a different energy, a mixture of anticipation and an almost electric tension that grew denser by the day. Arthur, beside Clara, sat at the vast library table, documents spread out before him like pieces of a grim puzzle. The lawyer, Mr. Almeida, a man with a serious expression and penetrating gaze, reviewed every detail, every bank statement, every recording, every informal statement from Lily that Clara had managed to extract with her patience and care. Arthur's voice, previously choked with grief, now rang with piercing clarity, recounting the events, the manipulations, the detours, the web of cruelty that had unfolded beneath his own roof. He felt a mixture of shame for his past blindness and an iron determination to right that wrong, to bring the truth to light, to protect the innocence of his children, a vow he had made to himself and to Ilara's memory. Clara, her eyes brimming with indignation, confirmed the reports, adding her own observations about Mrs. Albright's behavior, about the way she tried to alienate the children from anyone who might offer love and security, a pattern that was now frighteningly clear. Mrs. Albright, for her part, felt the radical change in the atmosphere of the house, a sense of siege that tightened with each passing day. Arthur and Clara's constant presence, the way they now monitored her every move, the way the children, especially Lily, seemed more at ease in the presence of their father, and all of this was a blow to her carefully constructed fortress. She tried to maintain her composure, her forced smiles more strained, her excuses more elaborate, but the mask was beginning to crack. One day, Arthur caught her rummaging through her desk drawer in the library, her eyes wide with surprise and panic when he entered. She mumbled something about searching for an ancient document, but the glint of guilt in her eyes was unmistakable, and Arthur simply watched her with cold calm, without uttering a word, making her recoil in despair, sensing her imminent downfall. The woman, who had once seemed untouchable in her manipulation, now stumbled over her own lies, her frantic mind searching for a way out, a way to reverse the inevitable. But the control she had exerted over the house and the children was disintegrating like sand through her fingers. The lawyer, after days of meticulous analysis, confirmed the gravity of the situation. He explained to Arthur that the embezzlement of Ilara's inheritance funds, coupled with the evidence of neglect and emotional abuse of the children captured on camera, constituted a robust case of fraud and child abuse. He detailed the next steps: filing a police report, obtaining a restraining order to remove Mrs. Albright from the mansion and the children, and preparing for the ensuing legal proceedings. With each word, Arthur felt a mixture of relief and profound pain, realizing the extent of the suffering his children had endured under his own roof. He imagined the fear in Lily's eyes, Leo's fragility, and a renewed strength drove him on, a silent promise that he would not rest until justice was served and his children were safe, free from any shadow of evil. Clara, beside him, held his hand, a silent support that spoke of love and solidarity, a reminder that he was not alone in this battle. Amidst preparations for the formal confrontation, Arthur dedicated every free minute to strengthening his bond with his children. He spent hours in the garden with Lily, planting flowers, watching the butterflies, and in one of these moments of pure innocence, the little girl, in a small voice, revealed another secret. Mrs. Albright said, "Mummy didn't like flowers, Daddy, but I know she loved them very much." The phrase, innocent on the surface, was a blow to Arthur's heart. Evidence of the cruel manipulation that sought to erase Ilara's memory from Lily's life. He hugged her tightly, promising that they would plant an entire garden in honor of Mummy. A garden full of color and life, a symbol of love and renewal. To Leo, Arthur sang lullabies that Ilara used to sing, rocking the baby in his arms, feeling the tiny body relax against his, and watched the baby smile, a ray of sunshine beginning to dispel the clouds of his own pain. Reconnecting with her children was a balm to her wounded soul, a constant reminder of what was truly important in life. Mrs. Albright, seeing her world crumble, tried one last tactic. She approached Arthur in a hallway of the mansion, her eyes filled with a mixture of pleading and anger, trying to turn the tables. She accused him of being an absent father, of neglecting his children, of making up stories to get rid of her for selfish reasons, and even insinuated that he was simply trying to avoid his responsibilities, that she was the only one who truly cared about the children. Her words, once so convincing, now sounded hollow and desperate, devoid of any power. And Arthur simply stared at her impassive, his eyes fixed on hers, unable to allow her manipulations to affect him. He had seen too much, heard too much, and the truth, like a raging river, was about to overflow, sweeping with it all the lies and cruelty she had sown. The scene was charged with a silent tension, a clash of wills where truth and justice were about to triumph over falsehood and evil, and Mrs. Albright, in her despair, realized that there was nowhere left to run, that the end of her farce was imminent. That day, the sun seemed brighter than ever, but Arthur felt a chill down his spine as he waited for the authorities to arrive. The lawyer had coordinated everything with the necessary discretion, and the police were on their way to execute the restraining order and begin the formal investigation. The mansion, once a stage for secrets and whispers, was about to become the setting for a public revelation, where Mrs. Albright's mask would be torn off once and for all. Arthur held Lily's hand, cradled in his lap, while Clara cradled Leo, both parents and their aunt offering a safe haven for the children, a shield against the approaching storm. The front door opened, and the firm footsteps of the police officers echoed through the hall, heralding the beginning of the end for the cleaning lady and the beginning of a new life for Arthur and his children. A life where truth and unconditional love would be the pillars of their rebuilding. The moment of climax was upon them, and Arthur was ready to face justice, not only to punish evil, but to heal the wounds and rebuild his family's future. The police officers' firm footsteps echoed through the mansion's hall, which had previously resounded only with the heavy silence of mourning, and, more recently, with the pent-up tension of Arthur's discoveries. Mrs. Albright, who had been in the kitchen under Clara's watchful eye, heard the sound, and her body stiffened, a shadow of panic crossing her previously impassive face. She tried to compose herself, a forced, trembling smile appearing on her lips, as if the authorities' presence were merely a misunderstanding, a formality she would soon unravel with her usual eloquence. Arthur, holding Lily in his arms, who was trembling slightly, advanced, his eyes fixed on the cleaning ladies, a mixture of pain and an icy determination that left no room for doubt. The lawyer, Mr. Almeida, accompanied the police officers, his documents in hand, his posture serious and unwavering. And it was he who uttered the words that would seal Mrs. Albright's fate, informing her of the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and child abuse, and of the restraining order that immediately removed her from the property and the children. Mrs. Albright's mask crumbled in an instant, revealing a pent-up fury and desperation she could no longer hide. Her eyes, once so calculating, now glowed with uncontrolled rage, and her voice, so long mellifluous and manipulative, rose in a shrill scream that echoed off the walls of the mansion. She began to gesticulate wildly, accusing Arthur of ingratitude, of inventing lies to get rid of her, of being an absent father who never cared about his children, and that she, and she alone, had dedicated her life to caring for them, sacrificing everything for them. The words poured from her mouth like a raging river of bitterness and resentment, a torrent of self-pity and envy that revealed the true depth of her malevolence, the root of hatred for Ilara and everything Arthur represented. She tried to approach Lily, reaching out as if to hug her, but Arthur stepped back, shielding the girl with his own body, and Clara, with Leo nestled against her chest, did the same, her looks of disgust and condemnation silencing the cleaning lady's last attempt at manipulation. The officers intervened calmly but firmly, restraining Mrs. Albright, who was now crying and cursing, her voice hoarse with anger and frustration. As one of the officers led her outside, the others began to inspect the house, collecting the recording equipment Arthur had discreetly installed, the bank statements the lawyer had prepared, and recording every detail that corroborated the accusations. Lily, still in her father's arms, watched the scene with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and almost palpable relief beginning to form on her childish face, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her small shoulders. Leo, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, simply snuggled closer to Clara, feeling the warmth and security radiating from her. Arthur felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, but it was a different kind of exhaustion, one that came from the conclusion of a hard-fought battle, from the promise of a new beginning. Mrs. Albright's departure from the mansion was a milestone, the closing of a dark chapter and the opening of a path to healing and rebuilding. The house, which before seemed to carry the echo of endless mourning, now seemed to breathe a lighter air, a silence that wasn't of absence, but of newfound peace. Arthur sat on the living room sofa, Lily on his lap, and Clara sat beside him, Leo in her arms, the four of them forming a small haven of safety amidst the turmoil they had just endured. Lily, her voice still a whisper, but with a gleam of hope in her eyes, asked her father if Mrs. Albright was leaving forever, and Arthur hugged her tightly, promising that she would never hurt them again, that from that moment on they would be safe, protected by the unconditional love he had rediscovered. The pain was still there, the emotional wounds were deep, but the truth had been revealed, and justice was on its way. The days that followed would be full of challenges, testimonies, and legal confrontations, but Arthur knew he was not alone, that he had Clara by his side, and more importantly, that he had his children, the reason for his struggle and the light of his new journey. Mrs. Albright's removal was not the end of the ordeal, but the beginning of a long and delicate healing process. Arthur devoted himself entirely to his children, relearning how to be a father, how to be present, how to hear Lily's whispers of fear and outbursts of joy, how to decipher Leo's babbles and smiles. He watched the girl, still somewhat withdrawn, afraid to laugh out loud or ask for anything remnants of the cruel manipulation she had suffered. But each day, with patience and love, Arthur encouraged her to express her feelings, to play freely, to be the child she was meant to be. He told stories of Mama Ilara, showing photos, keeping her memory alive in a loving and light-filled way, dispelling the lies the cleaning lady had planted. Clara became a constant and vital presence, a pillar of support for Arthur, and a figure of love and security for the children, helping them process the trauma and rebuild trust in the world. Days turned into weeks. The mansion, once a place of shadows, began to bloom again. Not only with the flowers Arthur and Lily planted in the garden, but with the genuine laughter of the children, the warmth of family meals, and his father's constant and loving presence. Arthur felt reborn, that the grief that had paralyzed him for so long was finally giving way to hope and renewed purpose. He knew the path to justice would be long, and that his children's emotional scars would take time to heal. But the truth had been revealed. Evil would be punished, and good, represented by the unconditional love he felt for Lily and Leo, was being rewarded with the rebuilding of his family, with the promise of a brighter, happier future, free from the shadows that had once threatened them. The battle in court was yet to come, but the greatest victory, the reclaiming of his family's soul, was already being built, brick by brick. With every hug, every smile, every word of love. The days following Mrs. Albright's forced departure were like a breath of fresh air for the mansion, a quiet relief that settled in every room, dispelling the heavy cloud of fear and manipulation that hung in the air. Lily, at first, was still cautious, her large, expressive eyes watching Arthur and Clara's every move, as if fearing that her newfound peace was fleeting, a mirage that could vanish at any moment. However, with Arthur's unwavering patience and Clara's constant affection, the girl began to blossom, her laughter once again echoing through the halls, previously filled with oppressive silence. Arthur spent hours with her, reading her favorite books, drawing on the living room floor, and in each interaction, he strived to build a bridge of trust, a safe haven where Lily could express her fears and joys without reservation. He listened to her with an open heart, her every word a balm to his own soul, a reminder of how much he had lost through her absence and how much he could still recover. For Leo, the change was more subtle, but equally profound. The baby, who had previously seemed always tense, now smiled more often, his little arms reaching out to Arthur and Clara, seeking the comfort of their embraces. Arthur would rock him for long minutes, feeling the warmth of his small body, and whisper words of love and promises of protection, an unbreakable bond forming between father and son. Clara, with her natural sweetness, helped create a routine of affection and security, playing with Leo on the living room rug, singing lullabies that Ilara used to sing, and the soft music filled the house with a melody of hope and belonging. Clara's presence was a gift, a calming force that allowed Arthur to focus on healing his children, knowing he was not alone in this journey of rebuilding, that shared grief became a powerful force for good. As the family found a new rhythm in life, the legal proceedings moved forward with the seriousness the case demanded. Their lawyer, Mr. Almeida, kept Arthur informed every step of the way, from filing the complaint and obtaining the permanent restraining order to preparing for the preliminary hearings. Arthur felt a weight on his chest with each document signed, with each detail of Mrs. Albright's cruelty relived, but this pain was tempered by an unwavering resolve. He knew that justice was not just a matter of punishment, but of reparation, of ensuring that no other child would suffer what Lily and Leo had endured. The image of Mrs. Albright, her face contorted with rage and despair on the day of her removal, still haunted him, but he refused to let her darkness overshadow the light his children were beginning to shine again. During one of these conversations with the lawyer, Arthur expressed his concern about the impact of the hearings on the children. Mr. Almeida, with his experience and sensitivity, assured him that the psychosocial support team was already involved, preparing the children, especially Lily, for what was to come in a way that would minimize trauma and maximize the protection of their innocence. He explained that Lily's testimony would be crucial, but that it would be conducted with the utmost care in a safe and welcoming environment, away from the intimidating formalities of a courtroom. Arthur felt a mix of relief and apprehension, knowing there was no way to completely avoid exposure, but trusting that his children would be guided by dedicated professionals, and that he would be by their side every step of the way, a protective shield against any further pain. The mansion, once a monument to grief and absence, began to transform into a home again. Arthur and Lily devoted themselves to the garden, planting a variety of colorful flowers in Ilara's honor, each petal a reminder of the love and life their mother represented. Lily, her small hands soiled with dirt, laughed as Arthur helped her water the plants, and the sound of her joy was a symphony to her father's heart. They spent afternoons in the library, no longer in heavy silence, but with the sound of Arthur's voice reading stories, or the gentle melody of a lullaby for Leo. Mealtimes became moments of togetherness and affection, with Clara and Arthur taking turns in the kitchen, preparing simple, delicious dishes that the children loved. And the dining room table, once solitary, was now a stage for lively conversation and infectious laughter. Arthur, in his moments of reflection, recognized the depth of his error in turning away, in allowing pain to blind him to the danger signs lurking around his children. Guilt was still a shadow, but no longer a paralyzing force. It had become a catalyst for action, a constant reminder of his responsibility and unconditional love. He promised himself that he would never again allow anything or anyone to threaten the happiness and safety of his children. Rebuilding his family was hard work, one day at a time, but every small step forward, every smile from Lily, every babble from Leo, was an immeasurable reward, a testament to the healing power of love and truth. The legal battle was only a part of the journey. The true victory was being forged within the walls of his home, in the hearts of his family, where the light of hope was finally shining brighter than ever. The months following Mrs. Albright's departure were a whirlwind of emotions and legal proceedings, a journey that tested Arthur's resilience and the strength of his newfound family connection. The preliminary hearings began, and with each step, Arthur felt a knot tighten in his stomach, reliving painful memories but also reaffirming his resolve. Mr. Almeida, with his expertise and unwavering calm, guided him through the legal maze, explaining every detail, every strategy, while Clara, with her constant presence, was a safe haven for the children and for Arthur. They took turns visiting the child psychologist, who accompanied Lily and Leo, helping them process the trauma in a playful and gradual way, ensuring that the little one's emotional well-being was the top priority throughout the entire process. Arthur watched Lily draw, and saw in the colors and shapes the expression of a world slowly regaining its vibrancy, a sign that healing was, indeed, taking place. In one of the court sessions, Mrs. Albright, defiant, still tried to manipulate the narrative. Her eyes, once so full of deceit, now held a mixture of desperation and suppressed rage as she defended herself with a play of victimhood, claiming to be the true victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by Arthur to get rid of her and avoid his parental responsibilities. She tried to paint a picture of an absent and neglectful father and a meddling aunt, but her words, once so effective, now sounded hollow and unreliable, devoid of the persuasive power that had once made her so dangerous. The prosecutor, armed with the irrefutable evidence gathered by Arthur and his lawyer dismantled each of her allegations with surgical precision, presenting bank statements that showed the embezzlement, security camera footage that revealed neglect and abuse, and testimonies from neighbors who had noticed the cleaning lady's strange behavior. The most delicate and crucial moment was Lily's testimony. Arthur was apprehensive, but Mr. Almeida and the psychologist had prepared everything with the utmost care, ensuring that the girl would be heard in a special room, with only professionals and her father present, away from the intimidating formalities of the courtroom. Lily, with a small voice, but with a clarity that surprised everyone, described moments of loneliness, her fear of locked doors, her hunger, and the cruel words Mrs. Albright addressed to her, always with the tone of someone mocking her innocence. She spoke of missing her mother, and how the cleaning lady said her mother no longer loved them, trying to erase Ilara's memory. Each word the girl spoke was a dagger in Arthur's heart, a painful confirmation of the suffering his children had endured, but also undeniable proof of the evil that had nestled in their home. Arthur held Lily's hand throughout the testimony, giving her strength and security, a silent reminder that he was there, unwavering, to protect her. Mrs. Albright, who had been following Lily's testimony via video feed in another room, couldn't contain her fury. A shrill scream echoed through the speakers, and she attempted to storm into the room where Lily was, only to be restrained by the court officers. It was a moment of chaos and revelation, where the cleaning lady's facade of victimhood crumbled completely, exposing her true nature, her malevolence, and the envy that consumed her. The prosecutor seized on the incident to bolster his case, showing the judge the defendant's instability and aggression, and how that same aggression had been directed at the children. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine, a mixture of revulsion and dark relief, knowing that the truth was prevailing, that justice was being served, and that the monster who had terrorized his family was finally being unmasked before everyone. After Lily's testimony and the incident with Mrs. Albright, the scales of justice tipped decisively. The evidence was overwhelming, and the defendant's credibility was completely destroyed. Arthur felt the weight of months of battle beginning to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope and a certainty that the outcome would be favorable to the protection of his children. He knew the final verdict was still to come, but most of the path had already been covered, and the light at the end of the tunnel shone brighter than ever. The rebuilding of his family was in full swing, and with every smile from Lily, every babble from Leo, Arthur felt that his life, which had been torn apart by loss, was being woven together again, stronger and more full of love and purpose than ever before. Clara's presence, ever attentive and loving, was a constant reminder that he was not alone, that family extended beyond blood ties, in an embrace of solidarity and unconditional affection. The day of the final verdict arrived, and Arthur felt the entire mansion hold its breath along with him, a tension that was almost palpable and extended to every room. He was in the courtroom next to Mr. Almeida, with Clara seated in the front rows, her eyes fixed on him, conveying a quiet strength. Lily and Leo were at home, under the care of a friend of Clara's, spared the formality and weight of that decisive moment. Mrs. Albright was present, her posture still defiant, but with an almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, her eyes sweeping the room as if searching for a final opening, a chance to reverse the inevitable. The judge, with a seriousness that reflected the gravity of the case, began to read the sentence, and each word seemed to echo in the heavy silence of the room, sealing the fate of the woman who had threatened his family's peace. The evidence, the testimonies, the truth. Everything had been weighed on the scales of justice, and the result could not have been different. Mrs. Albright was convicted of embezzlement, fraud, and most importantly, child abuse, receiving a sentence that would keep her away from society for a considerable time, in addition to a permanent restraining order that prohibited her from approaching Arthur and his children. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, and Arthur felt an overwhelming wave of emotions wash over him. It was exhaustion, yes, from months of fighting, sleepless nights, and lingering grief. But above all, it was a profound relief and a sense of justice served. His eyes met Clara's, and a faint but meaningful smile played across his lips. This moment was not one of noisy celebration, but of silent victory. The confirmation that the evil had been exposed and that the path to true healing for his family was finally clear. Mrs. Albright, upon hearing the sentence, had one final outburst of fury, her eyes flashing, but she was quickly restrained by the court officials, and her words of protest were lost in an incoherent mumble as she was escorted from the room, away from their lives, forever. Upon returning to the mansion, the atmosphere was different. There were no screams or euphoria, but a peace that gradually settled in, like a gentle breeze after a storm. Arthur hugged Lily and Leo with renewed intensity, feeling the warmth of their small bodies, their soft breath on his neck, and each embrace was a silent promise, an oath of love and protection. Lily, who had often asked if Mrs. Albright would return, now seemed to understand that the danger had passed. She snuggled against her father, her eyes wide and curious, and a genuine smile, free of any hint of fear, lit up her face. Leo, oblivious to the details of the legal battle, simply felt the security and affection surrounding him. Laughing and clapping in his lap, a small ray of sunshine radiating pure joy. The following days were devoted entirely to rebuilding not only their routine, but also the emotional bonds that had been so cruelly shattered. Arthur spent hours talking to Lily, listening to her stories, her games, validating every feeling, every fear she might still harbor. He encouraged her to paint, to draw, to express herself freely, and watched with a heart full of hope as the vibrant colors began to fill her sheets of paper, a reflection of the vivacity returning to her soul. For Leo, Arthur dedicated himself to every babble, every first step, every new discovery, being present at every stage of her growth. A father who was, finally, where he should be, attentive and loving. Clara became an indispensable part of that new home, a constant presence of care and wisdom. She helped Arthur create a routine that prioritized the children's well-being, with healthy meals, outdoor playtime, and bedtime reading and story time. The mansion's kitchen, once silent, now resounded with the sound of pots and pans and laughter, and the dining table, which had long been a place of silence and sadness, now became the stage for lively conversations, where Lily recounted her day at school and Leo uttered his first words, with Arthur and Clara listening attentively and lovingly. Little by little, the mansion ceased to be a monument to mourning and became a true home, a sanctuary of love and happiness. Arthur felt he was reconnecting with life in a way he never imagined possible. The guilt of her absence and of not having noticed the signs earlier still haunted him, but he had learned to transform it into a drive to be an even better, more present, and more conscious father. Ilara's memory was celebrated with love and affection, and Lily knew that her mother was a presence of light in their lives, not a painful absence. The mansion's garden, once a reflection of Arthur's sadness, now bloomed with the vibrant colors he and Lily had planted together, each flower a symbol of hope and a new beginning. This was the new chapter of their lives, built on truth, the courage to face darkness, and the unconditional love that united them, a promise that good always prevails, and that the deepest wounds can, indeed, be healed. The days that unfolded after the verdict were bathed in a newfound tranquility, a gentle current of peace that swept through the mansion, washing away the last vestiges of the suffocating fear and the chilling shadow of manipulation. Arthur, with a heart still tender from the wounds of the past, but now brimming with an unwavering resolve, dedicated himself entirely to the delicate task of mending the spirits of his children, pouring every ounce of his being into their healing. Lily, who once carried the weight of a silent world in her wide, expressive eyes, now began to unfurl like a delicate blossom. Her laughter, once a rare and fragile sound, now echoing more freely through the sunlit corridors, a symphony of rediscovered joy that filled the grand spaces of the house with a vibrant, living energy. Arthur spent countless hours immersed in her world, building towering castles of blocks that inevitably tumbled down in fits of giggles, painting vibrant pictures that adorned the refrigerator with a riot of colors, and most importantly, truly listening to her whispered dreams and lingering worries, ensuring every word she spoke was met with the warmth of his unwavering attention, a tangible promise of his constant presence. He delighted in the small, everyday miracles of their recovery, observing Lily's growing confidence as she recounted her school adventures with animated gestures, her imagination rekindled and soaring, painting vivid narratives with words that danced with newfound freedom. They would sit for long stretches in the sun-drenched garden, Lily's small hands cupping ladybugs and examining the intricate patterns of spiderwebs, her curiosity boundless and untainted by the shadows that had once threatened to engulf her spirit. Arthur, watching her, felt a profound sense of redemption bloom within his own chest, a quiet understanding that his journey had transformed from one of desperate search to one of active, joyful participation in the lives of his precious children. He saw in her bright eyes and her uninhibited smiles the tangible proof that the light of innocence, once dimmed, could shine brighter than ever when nurtured by truth and unconditional love, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For Leo, the transformation was equally profound, though expressed in the soft gurgles and eager stretches of a baby finding his voice and his place in a world now brimming with secure affection. Arthur would hold him close, feeling the rhythmic beat of the tiny heart against his own, whispering stories of brave knights and enchanted forests, his voice a soothing balm that enveloped the child in a cocoon of safety. Leo's first wobbly steps across the polished floor, his small hands reaching for Arthur's outstretched fingers, was celebrated with exuberance, each milestone a poignant reminder of the precious moments Arthur had almost lost, and a powerful motivation to cherish every single one moving forward. Clara, with her gentle wisdom and boundless patience, became an indispensable pillar of their new routine, her presence weaving seamlessly into the fabric of their daily lives, offering a steady hand and a loving heart that complemented Arthur's efforts, ensuring that every corner of the house resonated with warmth and genuine care. The mansion, once a grand silent sentinel of Arthur's grief and absence, began its magnificent metamorphosis into a true home, echoing with the vibrant sounds of life. The kitchen, once sterile and seldom used, now hummed with activity, the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the joyful cacophony of children's laughter and the clatter of pots and pans as Arthur and Clara collaborated on meals. The dining table, which had for so long stood as a solitary monument to loss, now became the vibrant heart of their evenings, filled with lively conversations, the sharing of dreams, and the simple, profound joy of a family reunited and thriving. Lily would recount tales from her day, often with exaggerated flair, while Leo, perched in his high chair, would babble happily, occasionally throwing a piece of food with gleeful abandon, all met with the indulgent smiles and loving gazes of Arthur and Clara, who found immense pleasure in these everyday moments of domestic bliss. Arthur often found himself reflecting on the arduous path they had traversed, the darkness that had threatened to consume them, and the fierce light of truth that had ultimately guided them through. The guilt, though still a quiet companion, no longer held him captive. It had softened, transforming into a potent reminder of his responsibility and an unshakable commitment to being an ever-present, vigilant father. He understood now, with a clarity that pierced through all his past regrets, that true wealth lay not in material possessions or professional achievements, but in the boundless love he shared with his children, in the secure embrace of his family. Garden, once a reflection of his own inner turmoil and neglect, now flourished under their combined care, a kaleidoscope of vibrant blooms that Lily tended with meticulous devotion, each petal a silent testament to hope, renewal, and the enduring power of a love that had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. The children, now free from the oppressive shadow of fear, blossomed in the nurturing environment Arthur and Clara had painstakingly cultivated. Lily's nightmares faded into distant memories, replaced by dreams filled with fantastical creatures and joyful adventures, and her sleep was now peaceful and undisturbed. Leo, growing rapidly, was a whirlwind of curious energy, exploring every nook and cranny of the house with wide-eyed wonder, his infectious giggles a constant melody that filled the air. Arthur watched them, his heart swelling with an emotion so profound it often brought tears to his eyes, a mixture of immense gratitude and an overwhelming sense of peace. He knew their journey was ongoing, that healing was a continuous process, but he also knew, with unwavering certainty, that they were on the right path, building a future steeped in love, trust, and an unbreakable bond that no darkness could ever again diminish. 2 years had passed since that fateful day, and the mansion, once a sanctuary of mourning and oppressive silence, now pulsated with renewed energy, a vibrant echo of Lily's laughter and Leo's hurried footsteps, growing strong and happy, exploring every corner of the house with the insatiable curiosity of a child. Lily, now an 8-year-old girl, radiated confidence, her large, expressive eyes filled with a vivacity that reflected the peace she had finally found. She was an inexhaustible source of stories, colorful drawings, and questions that challenged Arthur to see the world through new eyes, and he, in turn, dedicated every free moment to nurturing that flame, to being the present and loving father she and Leo deserved. Arthur, looking at his children, felt an overflowing gratitude, an unconditional love that had rebuilt his shattered world. Ilara's memory was a gentle presence, a constant reminder of the love that united them, and no longer an open wound that prevented him from living. The guilt that had paralyzed him for so long had dissolved, replaced by the certainty that he was fulfilling his promise, being the pillar of strength and affection his children so desperately needed. He had learned that love is an active force, requiring presence, listening, and the courage to face the shadows. This lesson manifested itself in every tight hug, in every bedtime story, In every shared meal, where the once only dining room table was now a stage for lively conversation and infectious laughter. Clara, with her gentle smile and quiet wisdom, had become an indispensable part of that new family, a bond of affection and support that Arthur valued immensely. She was not just a caregiver, but a friend and a counselor, and her presence brought a sense of completeness and harmony to the home. Together, they created an environment where safety and affection were the foundation, where the children could grow up free from fear, knowing they were loved unconditionally. Mornings at the mansion began with the smell of fresh coffee and a joyful chatter of Lily and Leal, who ran into Arthur's arms, ready for another day of discovery and play, a scenario Arthur never imagined possible in his darkest days. The garden, once a reflection of their grieving soul and abandonment, was now a vibrant mosaic of colors. Each flower planted by Arthur and Lily, a symbol of the beauty that can bloom even after the darkest of storms. Lily, with her small, dirt-stained hands, helped her father tend the plants, choosing new seedlings and learning the names of the flowers, an activity that connected them to Ilara's memory in a light and hopeful way. Leo, at 2 years old, ran across the lawn, chasing butterflies and laughing loudly, his contagious joy filling the air. That once silent space was now a stage for life in its purest form, a testament to the power of renewal and the power of nature. Mrs. Albright's wickedness had been punished, and good, represented by Lily's resilience, Leo's innocence, and Arthur's unwavering love, had been rewarded with a happiness that seemed infinite. Justice, they learned, was not merely a verdict handed down in a courtroom, but an ongoing journey of truth, courage, and above all, unconditional love, manifested in the daily rebuilding of a family. Arthur, who had lost so much, had found so much more, not in material wealth, but in the unbreakable bond that united him to his children, in the promise of a future where love and light would always prevail over darkness. They were living proof that, even in the greatest adversity, hope and kindness can blossom, transforming pain into a catalyst for a fuller and more meaningful life. And you, what would you do to protect a child you love, to restore their innocence and secure their future? What are the limits of your courage when the truth needs to be told and justice demanded? Think about it, share your reflections, and remember, in a world where shadows try to obscure the light, love, truth, and courage are always the most powerful paths to building a safe home and a future full of hope for all. Let us be the voice of those who cannot speak, and the light for those who seek a path through the darkness.